don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was just curiosity, or maybe I was being an idiot, but I found myself in one of the darker corners of the internet, on a website that claimed it could predict your exact date of death. Yeah, I know how that sounds. It's the kind of crap you read about in those ridiculous horror stories, but I swear I'm not making this up. This was real, and I have no idea how to explain what happened next. I guess I should back up a bit. My best friend Ryan and I had always been kind of obsessed with weird stuff on the internet. We'd stay up late going down these creepy rabbit holes, watching cursed YouTube videos, reading about urban legends, you name it. So one night we stumbled on this random post that talked about a hidden site on the dark web. They called it the Oracle. People claimed it would tell you, down to the day, when you were going to die. Ryan was skeptical, like really skeptical. "Dude, it's probably just a scare tactic," he'd said, smirking at the post. But something about it hooked me. Maybe it was because, we think we're invincible at our age. Death is something that happens to other people, or it's so far in the future it doesn't feel real. But there was a tiny part of me that just had to know, what if it could actually predict it? What if it wasn't a joke? So I went digging, deep into places I definitely shouldn't have been, pulling up Tor and browsing sketchy forums until I finally found the link to the Oracle. The site looked like something straight out of a nightmare, all black and red, with this distorted, glitchy text that seemed to melt down the screen. The only thing on the page was a blank field that said, "Enter full name and date of birth." Ryan was watching over my shoulder, half amused and half freaked out. "I dare you," he said, nudging me. "I bet it just gives you some random date. It's all BS." So I typed in my name and date of birth, then hit enter. The screen went black, and for a moment I thought my computer froze. But then these numbers started flashing like they were flickering on and off so fast I could barely read them. But I caught it. January 7th, 2073. Ryan started laughing. "See, I told you. They just throw out some random date like 70 years in the future. What a scam." But something about it didn't sit right with me. I can't explain why, but seeing that date made me feel unsettled. Like, deep in my gut, I knew it wasn't just a random number. Then Ryan got this stupid grin on his face. "All right, my turn," he said, pushing me out of the way. He typed in his own info, hit enter, and waited. The screen went dark again, and the numbers appeared. Only this time, they didn't flicker. They were just there, steady and solid on the screen. October 3rd, 2024. I remember laughing nervously. "Guess you don't have long," I joked, trying to lighten the mood. But Ryan didn't laugh. He just stared at the screen, his face suddenly pale. "Dude, that's like a week away." We both tried to brush it off as some freak coincidence, like maybe it was rigged to freak people out by giving them close dates to scare them. But the thought wouldn't leave me alone. The rest of the night, Ryan kept looking over his shoulder like he was waiting for something. And honestly, so was I. The next few days were weird. Ryan and I both tried to act normal, but I could tell he was different. He got paranoid, started avoiding crowds, looking at everyone like they were out to get him. He'd cross the street if he saw anyone walking towards him, and he even stopped driving, saying he didn't want to risk some freak accident. I'd never seen him like that before. He was always the guy who'd laugh at danger, who'd do the dumbest things just for a thrill. But this broke him. I tried talking him down. I told him it was all just a coincidence, some stupid prank from a stupid website. But deep down, I think he believed it. And I could feel it too, this gnawing fear, like a shadow over us that wouldn't go away. It was in every laugh that cut too short, every look he gave me that was just a little too serious. And then October 3rd came. Ryan didn't want to be alone that day, so I stayed with him. We didn't do anything special, just hung out, played video games, tried to keep our minds off it. But every time we heard a noise, every time the phone rang or someone walked past the house, he'd flinch. I kept telling him he was being ridiculous, that nothing was going to happen, but by that point I was barely convincing myself. It was around 11 p.m., just an hour left until the day would be over. We were finally starting to relax, starting to believe that maybe it was all just a sick joke, when his phone rang. He picked it up, but there was no one on the other end, just silence. He looked at me, his face completely white, and whispered, "I think it's time." I laughed, trying to play it off. "Dude, it's just a prank call." But then there was this sound, this horrible, wet, crunching sound coming from outside his window. I went to look, and I saw, God, I don't even know how to describe it. There was this figure standing on his lawn, barely visible in the dark, but its eyes were shining in the light from the street lamp. And it was grinning, this twisted, awful grin that seemed to stretch too far across its face. Ryan screamed, and that thing, whatever it was, just kept standing there, staring at us. I yanked the blinds shut, grabbed him, and we bolted down to the basement. We huddled there for what felt like hours, listening to the sound of footsteps echoing outside, like someone or something was walking around, waiting for us to come out. And then it stopped. The silence was almost worse than the footsteps. We stayed there, holding our breath, until the clock hit midnight. After that night, Ryan was a wreck. I tried to convince him that it was all in his head, that it was just some creep messing with us. But I could tell he wasn't buying it. To be honest, I wasn't either. There was something about that figure, about the way it stared at us. I couldn't shake the feeling it wasn't human. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see those eyes glowing in the darkness, that twisted grin stretched too far across its face. Ryan barely left his house after that. He stopped answering my calls, stopped responding to texts. Whenever I went over, he wouldn't even come to the door. He'd just crack the window open a bit, just enough to say he was fine and that I should go home. He looked awful, pale, his eyes red and sunken like he hadn't slept in days. He kept mumbling stuff like, "It's not over," and "It's waiting for me." It was freaking me out, but I didn't know what to do. I kept telling him to see someone, like a therapist or something, but he just laughed in this weird, hollow way that sent chills down my spine. "You don't get it," he'd say. "It's not going to stop until it gets what it wants." The worst part, I started seeing things too. It started with shadows in my room at night, shifting shapes that seemed to crawl along the walls. I'd hear footsteps outside my house, soft at first, just a faint crunch on the gravel. But when I'd go to check, there'd be nothing, just empty silence. One night, I could have sworn I heard whispering, this faint, guttural sound, like someone speaking in a language I couldn't understand, right outside my bedroom window. Then came the messages. It started with my phone buzzing in the middle of the night. I picked it up, thinking it was just a spam text or something, but when I unlocked it, there was no notification, just a blank screen. I figured it was a glitch, turned it off, and tried to go back to sleep. But then it happened again, and again. Every time I'd check, there was nothing there. Finally, one night, around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed again. But this time, there was a message. Just one word, in all caps: "Run." My heart was pounding as I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. I didn't recognize the number. It was just a random sequence, like someone had typed it in at random. I didn't want to believe it had anything to do with that night, but I could feel that same chill, that same dread creeping over me, like a shadow wrapping around my chest. The next day, I went back to Ryan's place. I didn't care if he was going to brush me off. I had to see him. I banged on his door for what felt like forever, until he finally opened it, looking even worse than the last time I'd seen him. His face was hollow, his skin almost grey, like he'd aged 10 years in a week. He barely looked at me as he mumbled, "It knows about you too." That hit me like a punch to the gut. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. He just shook his head, looking down at his hands, which were shaking. "The Oracle. I tried to warn you, man. Once it knows you're looking for answers, It doesn't stop. Not until it gets what it wants. What the hell are you talking about? I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. That was just some stupid website. It doesn't mean anything. But he didn't respond. He just looked past me, out into the street, like he was expecting something to come for him right then and there. I remember the way his eyes looked, hollow, empty, like he was already halfway gone. After that, I didn't see him for a while. He stopped responding to my texts, stopped answering the door. I tried to move on, to shake off the feeling that something was watching me, but every time I thought I'd escaped it, something would happen. A noise outside my window at 3 a.m., a shadow in the corner of my room, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Then, one night, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing again. This time, there was no strange number, no weird message. It was a text from Ryan. "I'm sorry. I tried. It's too late." I don't know why, but I felt this overwhelming urge to go to his house. I didn't care what time it was, didn't care how crazy it sounded. I just knew I had to see him, make sure he was okay. So I got in my car and drove over, the whole way telling myself that it was probably just a cry for help, that he was just messing with me. But when I pulled up to his house, everything was dark. No lights, no sound. It felt like the whole place was holding its breath. I got out of the car and walked up to the front door, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I knocked once, then twice, then again, harder. No answer. Finally, I tried the door. It was unlocked. I stepped inside, and the smell hit me immediately, this sickly, rotting stench that made my stomach twist. I called out his name, but the only response was silence. I walked down the hallway, every step echoing in the quiet, until I reached his bedroom door. It was open just a crack, enough to see inside. Ryan was lying on the bed, his eyes wide open, staring up at the ceiling. At first I thought he was just lying there, maybe asleep, or in some kind of trance. But as I got closer, I saw that his chest wasn't moving. His skin was pale, almost blue, and his mouth was twisted in this horrific expression, like he'd been screaming right up until his last breath. I stumbled back, almost tripping over my own feet, and ran out of the house. I didn't stop running until I was back in my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key in the ignition. The whole drive home, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that figure with the twisted grin sitting in the back seat watching me.
I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ryan's face, frozen in that look of terror. And in the days that followed, it got worse. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, hearing whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. It was like something had followed me, something that wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. Then, a week after Ryan's death, I got another message. After Ryan died, I tried to tell myself it was over, that whatever had happened with him was done. But it wasn't that easy to shake. I kept getting these signs, things that made me feel like whatever took Ryan wasn't finished with me. The week after his death was a blur. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't sleep. I just kept replaying that night in my head. The text message, the silence in his house, the way he looked lying there. And that smell, I couldn't get it out of my nose. It was like rot and something else, something stale and unnatural. I even started smelling it in my own room sometimes, faintly at first, but growing stronger every night, like it was creeping closer. Then, exactly 7 days after Ryan's death, my phone buzzed around 3 a.m. I'd been dreading it, lying awake and staring at the ceiling, almost expecting it. I didn't want to look, but it felt like I didn't have a choice. So, with a shaky hand, I picked up my phone, and there it was. A message from a number I didn't recognize, just like the last time. It said, "Still watching." I felt this cold, creeping sensation spread through me, like icy fingers wrapping around my spine. I tried to convince myself it was just a prank, maybe some twisted friend of Ryan's who'd heard about what happened. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't just some random message. This was something else, something I couldn't explain.
The next day, things got worse. I kept seeing these shadows, even in broad daylight. They'd flicker at the edge of my vision, quick enough that I'd think I was imagining it, but they'd always vanish when I turned to look. I'd see them in mirrors too, these brief glimpses of something standing behind me, just for a second before disappearing. One night I even saw it in my bedroom. I'd woken up around 2 a.m., sweating and breathing hard, and when I opened my eyes I saw this figure in the corner, barely visible in the dark. It was the same shape I'd seen in Ryan's yard, but this time it was closer, watching me with those eyes that seemed to glow, even in the darkness. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, staring at me with that horrible grin. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I was paralyzed, lying there with my heart pounding, my body frozen in place. I don't know how long it lasted, maybe a few seconds, maybe hours, but eventually it just faded away like smoke dissipating in the air. When I finally snapped out of it, I bolted out of bed and turned every light in the house on, checking every corner, every closet, every window, but there was nothing. After that night, I started losing it. I'd spend hours online, reading every forum, every story I could find about people who'd seen similar things, about people who'd gone on that website. I was desperate for answers, but every story I found just made me feel worse. People talking about seeing shadows, getting strange messages, feeling like something was following them. And then, eventually, silence. Every person who claimed they'd gone on the Oracle seemed to vanish, leaving nothing but fragments of their posts behind, like someone had gone in and erased them. I even tried contacting some of these people, messaging them on every platform I could find. Most of the profiles were abandoned, their last posts going back months or years. But there was one guy, someone who'd made a post about a month before I found it. I reached out, hoping maybe he'd give me something. Anything. That could explain what was happening. The next day, he messaged me back. His reply was short, just a single sentence. Delete everything. I didn't understand at first. I asked him what he meant, but he didn't respond. The next time I checked his profile, it was gone, like he'd never existed. I took his advice, though. I deleted every search, every message, every link that led me to the Oracle. I even scrubbed my browser history, hoping it would somehow make a difference. For a few days, things actually seemed to calm down. I stopped seeing the shadows, stopped smelling that rotten stench. I was finally starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, it was over. And then, last night happened. I was lying in bed, just about to drift off, when I heard this sound, this faint scratching noise coming from outside my bedroom door. At first I thought it was my imagination. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe one of the branches from the tree outside scraping against the wall. But the sound kept getting louder, more insistent, like something was clawing its way toward me. I held my breath, straining to listen, and then I heard it. This faint, whispering voice, so quiet, it was almost like it was in my head. It was saying my name, just over and over again, in this raspy, guttural tone, like someone forcing the words out through clenched teeth. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. Slowly, I reached for my phone, turning on the flashlight and aimed it toward the door. The light cut through the darkness, and for a moment, I thought I was alone. But then I saw it. A single, twisted hand reaching around the edge of the doorframe. The skin was pale and mottled, with long, blackened nails that looked like claws. The fingers curled around the doorframe, one by one, pulling it open, inch by inch. I was frozen, staring as this thing's face finally appeared, peering at me with those same glowing eyes, that same twisted grin that stretched too far across its face. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at me with that horrible grin. And then, slowly, it lifted one finger to its lips as if to say, shh. I scrambled out of bed, grabbing the nearest thing I could find, a lamp, and swung it toward the figure. But by the time I'd blinked, it was gone, leaving nothing but silence and darkness. The room was empty, but I knew it wasn't over. I don't know what this thing wants, or why it's still haunting me. I've tried everything to get rid of it, deleting every trace of the Oracle, burning sage, calling priests, you name it, but it won't stop. It just keeps coming, getting closer and closer each time. This morning I got another message from that strange number. It just said, "Tonight." I don't know what's going to happen, but I have a feeling it's not going to end well. And if you're reading this, if you've even thought about looking for the oracle, don't. Whatever curiosity you have, whatever answers you think you'll find, it's not worth it. Because once it knows you're looking, it won't stop. It doesn't care who you are, where you go, or how far you run, it'll find you. And when it does, you'll wish you'd never looked for it in the first place. That night, I barely slept. Every little creak, every whisper of wind outside made me jump. I was expecting it, waiting for it. And as the hours crept by, I felt it. This oppressive heaviness in the air, like the walls were closing in, like something was pressing down on me. Around 2:30 a.m., my phone buzzed. I didn't want to look, but it was like I had no choice. I reached for it, fingers trembling, and saw another message from that same unknown number. This time, it wasn't just a word or a warning. It was a video. It took me a second to process what I was seeing, but when I hit play, my stomach twisted. The video was shaky, like it had been recorded by someone walking, and it was dark, barely lit by some distant streetlight. I squinted, trying to make out what I was looking at, and then my blood went cold. The camera was focused on a window, my window, the one in my bedroom. Whoever was recording was standing right outside my house, filming my room from the yard. I stared at the screen, frozen, watching as the camera slowly zoomed in closer and closer, right up to the glass. And then, suddenly, the perspective shifted, tilting upward as if whoever was holding the phone was looking at the roof, or maybe something above it. A second later, I heard it. This scratching sound, this slow, deliberate scraping noise, like claws dragging across wood, coming from directly above me. I stared up at the ceiling, heart pounding, as the sound grew louder, moving across the roof, stopping right over my bed. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, maybe a raccoon or something. But deep down, I knew better. This thing wasn't human, wasn't even close. I wanted to scream, to run, but it felt like I was pinned down, like something was holding me in place. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. The silence was so thick I could hear my own heartbeat thudding hard and fast in my chest. My phone buzzed again. Another video. With shaky hands, I opened it. This one was shorter, just a few seconds long, and it was taken from inside my house. The angle was low, almost like the phone had been dropped on the floor, pointing up toward the hallway outside my bedroom. And standing there, right in the middle of the hallway, was a figure. It was blurry, like the camera couldn't focus on it, but I could see enough. The dark, tattered clothing, the two long limbs, the eyes that glowed even through the grainy footage. It didn't move, just stood there, watching the door to my room, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, like it was listening for something. For me. I looked up at my door, half expecting to see the handle turning, but it was still. I forced myself to get out of bed, moving as quietly as possible, and grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a metal baseball bat I'd shoved in my closet months ago and forgotten about. Clutching it tight, I crept toward the door, barely daring to breathe. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. No shadowy figure, no sounds, just silence stretching out in every direction. But the air was thick with that stench, the same one I'd smelled in Ryan's room, that mix of rot and something else, something bitter and wrong. It felt like the walls were closing in on me, like the whole house was filled with this malevolent presence, watching, waiting. I backed up, inching my way toward the stairs, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it would hear me. Every step felt like it took an eternity, my feet barely making a sound on the floorboards, but I could feel it, that creeping sensation, like something was right behind me, inches away, reaching out. I didn't make it to the front door. Just as I was about to step into the living room, I heard a soft whisper, so close it felt like it was right in my ear. Turn around. I froze, every instinct screaming at me not to listen, not to look. But it was like something else took control, something stronger than fear. I turned, and there it was, standing at the end of the hallway. It was taller than I'd realized, its head almost brushing the ceiling, and its limbs were too long, bending in unnatural angles as it took a step toward me. The eyes were glowing, brighter than before, and the grin, that awful, twisted grin, stretched wider, splitting its face open in this expression of pure malice. It didn't speak, didn't make a sound, but I could feel its presence in my mind, this invasive, suffocating sense of dread that grew stronger with every step it took. I swung the bat, desperate, aiming right for its head, but the second I moved, it was gone, vanishing into the shadows like smoke. I stumbled back, barely catching myself before I fell, and I ran out of the house, down the street, not stopping until I was blocks away, panting and gasping for breath. When I finally slowed down, I realized my phone was still in my hand, clutched so tightly my knuckles were white. I looked at it, hoping maybe I'd see something that would explain this, something that would make it all make sense. But when I opened my messages, every single video, every message from that unknown number, it was all gone. No trace, no evidence, just a blank screen and a sinking feeling that I was alone in this, that no one would ever believe me. I didn't go back to the house. I couldn't. I spent the next few days crashing with friends, sleeping with the lights on, jumping at every sound. But I couldn't escape it. Everywhere I went, I'd see it, in mirrors, in reflections, in the dark spaces just out of reach. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of those glowing eyes, that twisted grin, staring at me from across the room, just for a split second before it vanished. Then, last night, I got another message. Just one word, in all caps: run. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. I don't know if I'll ever escape it. But if there's one thing I'm sure of, it's this. It's not going to stop until it gets what it wants. It's like it's hunting me, like it's playing with me, dragging it out, making me suffer. If you're reading this, don't look for the oracle, don't go searching for answers, don't make the same mistake I did, because once it knows you're looking, once it gets a taste of your fear, it won't ever let you go. I didn't think it would come down to this. But after that last message, run, I knew I didn't have a choice. I'd tried to ignore it, tried to move on, but it had become clear. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't going to leave me alone. It was like a shadow that had attached itself to my life, always there, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to show itself. After a few days of barely sleeping, I decided to confront it. I figured if it was going to come for me, then maybe I could face it on my own terms. So I went back to my house in the middle of the night, armed with nothing but my phone and a desperate plan to get some answers, or maybe just end this once and for all. Walking back into that house felt like walking into a tomb. Every room was filled with that same sickly smell, that mix of rot and something sharp, acidic, like old metal. The lights flickered as I moved from room to room, each step echoing in the silence, making me feel like I was being watched from every angle. I went to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, clutching my phone in both hands, waiting. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I knew it would come. I sat there for what felt like hours, the silence pressing down on me until finally I heard it. That faint scratching sound like nails dragging across the walls. It was coming from the hallway, growing louder and louder, getting closer with each second. My phone buzzed. I looked down, and there it was, a message from that same number. This time it wasn't a word or a video, it was a picture. My blood went cold as I opened it. The photo was of me, sitting on my bed in that exact moment, staring down at my phone. But in the background, barely visible in the shadows behind me, was the figure, towering, twisted, its eyes glowing in the darkness, its grin stretched so wide it looked like its face would split apart. I turned around, but the room was empty, just silence and shadows. I looked back at the photo, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the phone steady. But then, as I stared at the screen, I saw the figure start to move, shifting in the picture, its head tilting as if it were watching me, studying me. My phone buzzed again, and another message appeared, almost time.
I don't know why, but something snapped inside me. I was done running, done being scared. I screamed at it, shouting into the empty room, demanding it show itself, demanding to know what it wanted. My voice echoed off the walls, fading into the darkness. And for a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, I felt it. This cold breath on the back of my neck, so close I could feel the hairs on my skin prickling, like something was right behind me, leaning in, watching. Slowly I turned around, and there it was, standing right in front of me. It was worse up close, far worse than I'd ever imagined. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over a skeletal frame that seemed impossibly tall, with arms that were too long, fingers that ended in sharp, blackened claws. But the face, God, that face. Its mouth was open in that horrible grin, showing rows of jagged teeth, and its eyes were empty, just dark, hollow pits that seemed to suck in all the light around them. It leaned down, bringing its face inches from mine, and I could smell its breath, like decay and earth, like something that had crawled out of a grave. It didn't speak, but I could hear it in my mind, this low, guttural whisper that sent chills down my spine, telling me things I didn't want to hear, things that twisted my thoughts and made my head pound. I stumbled back, clutching my head, trying to block it out. But the whispers only got louder, filling my mind with images, memories that weren't mine. Scenes of people, just like me, caught in the same trap, haunted and hunted until there was nothing left but empty shells. I could see their faces frozen in terror, hear their voices echoing in my mind, all of them screaming, pleading, begging for mercy. And then in a flash, it was gone. The whispers stopped, the shadows lifted, and I was alone again, standing in the middle of my empty bedroom, shaking and gasping for breath. I thought it was over, that maybe I'd survived. But when I looked down at my phone, there was one final message. Just 3 words. It's your turn.
The screen went black, and no matter what I did, it wouldn't turn back on. I tried everything, restarting it, plugging it in, even hitting it a few times, but nothing worked. It was dead, like the battery had been drained all at once. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing from the hallway outside my room. I knew, deep down, that it wasn't over, that it would never be over. The oracle had marked me, just like it had marked Ryan, just like it had marked all those other people, and there was nothing I could do to escape it. As I sit here writing this, I can hear it, those footsteps growing closer, one by one, until they're just outside my door. I know what's going to happen. I know that when I open this door, it'll be waiting for me, that twisted grin, those empty eyes, that whisper that fills your mind until there's nothing left. If you're reading this, don't look for it. Don't search for the oracle. Don't try to find answers, because once it knows you're looking, once it catches your scent, it'll never stop. It'll follow you, haunt you, until there's nothing left of you but fear and shadows. And maybe one day you'll hear it too. That whisper, that voice in the dark calling your name, telling you it's your turn.